Hi everybody, welcome to the live stream. So today we are going to be walking through the edit of a wedding, the wedding of Holly and Grant. This was around about sort of 2 or 3 weeks ago we shot this. We've recently delivered the pictures, and now that the bride and groom has seen it, we're going to take a look at editing the wedding from scratch. So everything's been reset. These are the images we delivered, but they have not been edited. And we're now going to spend some time going through how we work on the day, how we edit the pictures after the fact, and you're going to be able to get a feel for what we're doing. The session was shot on a Sony a7 III with 3 lenses, a 35mm 1.4, a 55mm 1.8, and an 85mm 1.8. These are all the Sony lenses, and that's basically it. If you've got any questions while we're going through, feel free to ask me. There's already been a couple of questions asked beforehand, and I'll address them as we go through, but feel free to jump in. If you come into this stream later on and you're watching this after the fact, if you've got any other questions, feel free to hit me up on Instagram. I'm at bytomw, and I'm on Twitter at bytomw as well. So as we go through this, feel free to ask any questions you've got. I won't be able to see them in real time, although I am monitoring it. I'll stop periodically and read through any questions we've had already, and we can try and get some answers. I've kind of got a bit of an idea of how this is going to go. We're going to start by going through the day in chronological order. There are a lot of pictures, and I'm going to get onto that in a minute. If we feel like we're getting to a stage where you get the gist of what's happening, we'll move on to another section of the day, because I want to show you how we edit at different times, not just in one lighting condition and in one situation. I want to show differences of approach later on in the day in different times, because I think there's some stuff that a lot of people do that could be adjusted to make it a little bit more effective, or potentially to help you stand out in the industry. So we're going to get started now. So for those that don't know, this is Lightroom. This is an editing program. This is what pretty much every photographer I'm aware of uses. It's either this or a program called Capture One. I prefer Lightroom. If you want to know why, I've already done one live edit already, and we did talk about that a little bit there, but we're going to be using Lightroom. I edit from Smart Previews. These are basically, the computer takes the original file and it will create like a kind of a smaller sized version that it can use to edit. You don't get any loss of quality when you export. You just edit from these, and then it references the original file later, and you can render it. This makes editing in Lightroom much quicker, which is one of the main complaints that people have about this. Now, normally, when you begin, you'll import your pictures from your camera into the computer, and you will choose what quality of a preview you would like. You can choose like an image render size that you can see here on the screen, and you can choose the resolution. Now, a smart preview is not like that. It is just a way of the computer looking at the files without having access to the original RAW. If you're using a smart preview, it's not looking at the original file, it's looking at a version that this software program's created. And we're not going to get into that again, but that's just giving you an overview of what a smart preview is. If you see it on the screen, that's what it is. So we're going to start with getting ready on the wedding day. So when I first start, I'll go through and arrange things into different segments of the day. Getting ready at the hall, because it was a Jehovah's Witness wedding. It wasn't at a church, so they have a kingdom hall instead, but it's pretty much the same. If it was a church wedding, it would be at the church or at the ceremony or whatever. We then have at the venue, which is as they arrive to the wedding venue or transit to. Portraits, which are exactly what you would think. They're portraits of the bride and groom. Speeches, which are a big thing in England. These are the kind of speeches usually from the groom, the kind of best man, the father of the bride, all that kind of thing. Cake and first dance is the cake cutting and the formal first dance and the things that lead up to it. And then family formals are your kind of family portrait pictures with people looking at the camera, the stuff that most photographers don't like to do, but most bride and grooms should have. They go into the night, which is everything that happens after all the formal things have gone on. And the last section is details. Now, I put these last because I care about them least, if I'm honest. They're important because they're part of the wedding day, but they are things you can take your time over. They're not going to be different in 10 minutes time. It doesn't really matter when you photograph it, although there are some exceptions to that. So we're going to start with getting ready. And this is with Harley getting ready. I am usually shooting on my own unless you specifically request a second shooter. And this is how I work. Now, we did this in the previous edit that we looked at, but I use presets for my basic color balance. So when I'm editing a wedding, I will normally select the color preset I think that works, and I will apply it throughout every stage of the day. I use Maston Labs. They emulate film. When I first started my career, I started out shooting film, so I'm trying to get as close to that look that I liked initially as I can. This is as close as I've seen from anybody, so we use Maston Labs. So what I'm doing here is taking a look at the scene. As you can see, Lightroom will preview how the preset looks as you roll over preset. Now, almost always I'm using Portra 400, which is a really nice kind of color base. It's pretty neutral, but it's got nice warm skin tones. We go with that. I like the way it looks. Now, the nice thing about Lightroom is in the library module, which is what we're switching over to now, you can apply a preset to every image. So we're going to come out of this one picture, and we're going to go to the whole of the morning, the whole lot, and we're going to select everything. I'm going to go through, I'm going to save presets, Maston Labs Original, Portra Original, sorry, and then Portra 400, and apply that. Now, the reason I do this is I want to be able to see the images, at least roughly how they're going to look with the right color balance. There's another adjustment I make to pretty much everything at this stage of the day, and that's applying lens corrections. So again, we're going to go through and apply that to literally everything because I want to see that with that setting turned on. Again, lens corrections on, and then we can start going through the images one by one to try and get a good feel for how they look. Now you can see this progress bar at the top left. This is showing that the preset is being applied to the images. So Lightroom is gradually going through and applying these changes to every photograph. That's happened for the first one, it'll happen for the second. This is normally a bit faster than this, but it's pretty slow today because of the fact we're running the capture software on the computer as well as trying to edit the photographs at the same time. So we're going to be a little bit slower. So once that has applied, we're then going to go into develop. I'm going to go ahead and do some fine edits. Now the screen's black because it's not finished rendering the preset yet. Yeah, so now that we've got that, we're going to have a look at some of the other adjustments you can make. Now, with film, one of the big variations that you tended to get was the way it was scanned. So now that we've chosen the film, under Maston Labs presets, you would then decide how you want it to be scanned. The kind of different ways you can look at are listed down here. You've got all hard, which is a very, very, very high contrast. It means that the brights are going to be as bright as they could get on the scanner, and the darks are going to be as dark as they could be on the scanner. All soft is the exact opposite. It makes the brights slightly darker and the dark slightly brighter. Highlight hard just adjusts the highlights so they are as bright as they can be. And highlight soft makes the highlights a little bit darker. Shadows hard makes the shadows as dark as they can be on the scanner. And shadows soft makes the shadows as bright as they can be without it looking natural again on the scanner. Maston Labs is built after a Fuji Frontier, and the idea is that you want to look at this and decide based on the situation what you think is best. So if you come away from this, this is quite a high contrast scene. You've got the really bright window on the left hand side, and on the other side of the room there's very little light. So we're going to go with all soft, which means that those shadows are going to be raised, so you can see more detail in this guy's shirt and in the background over here in this the kind of hairstylist's face, and in Harley's expression you can see a little bit more as well. Now that alone isn't really enough to brighten this image as much as I'd like, so we would then usually pump the exposure a little bit and kind of add a little bit more exposure. The white balance is pretty much where I'd like it to be, so that's how warm or cold the image is, how much orange or blue there is in the image. But again, the Maston Labs presets include some very common lighting situations like daylight, cloudy, and open shade, and these are all like natural light presets, and they show you how this film would have looked if you shot it in a situation. So the aim of the game here is to get it as natural as you can, make it look like film. So I'm going to go to daylight, and it's pretty close, but I feel like it's kind of cold. So we're going to go for cloudy because I feel like it gives a nice warm skin tone to Harley and everybody else in the room. And then we're going to move on to the next image, and it's literally that simple. Now, normally I'll hit previous to see how the changes I just made to the prior image look on the next shot. And it's pretty much where I want it to be. I feel like I intentionally shot this dark, so I'm going to darken it a little bit by dropping the exposure. That's literally it. We move on. And again, previous. Now remember, I darkened the previous image, so I'm likely to expect to see when I hit that button that everything's a little bit too dark. So we're going to reset the exposure. And again, I still feel it's a little bit too dark, so we're going to pump that up a little bit higher to get this really bright look where there's tons of light, everything looks really soft and kind of inviting, and that's kind of what we get to. Yeah. And I really like this exactly as it is, so again, we move on. And with weddings, a big deal is that it's going to take a while to get through the whole lot. So if you can get a result that you're happy with quickly, you're going to be able to deliver the whole thing faster. And again, a large part of shooting it right. The other side is knowing what you like, understanding how your editing style works, and making sure that you run through at a pace that you're comfortable with. So this next shot, again, previous, because we want to see how the changes we've already made look. Now, here we see an issue with white balance. So to my eye, this is now far too orange, like considerably too orange. So what I'm going to do here is look at the white balances. Now, from experience, I know that all the daylight options are slightly warmer than the ones that you see under natural light. So I'm going to go for daylight, and it kind of brings it down a little bit. But even then, it's still a little bit too orange. So I'm going to make a manual adjustment to the temperature over on this side and bring that down. Now, I feel like it should be around about 5100 Kelvin, and I'm going to leave it there. And again, that's giving us a nice warm image, but again, it's not over the top. I still feel this is slightly dark, and again, it's because I usually shoot on manual, and this was happening away from where I was photographing a second ago, so it's slightly darker. You might have to make bigger adjustments. And this is where a better camera will come in handy, because if you look, I can add a lot more brightness and the picture still looks natural, there's no grain, it's just a really nice image, really clean, and you have the flexibility to decide on how bright you want it after you've taken the shot. So again, we move on. Really cool moment. Again, there's a bit more emotion here, and by this point you might have noticed that I've managed to sort my exposure out. Again, I can bring that back down. Now, up to this point, every single photograph we've looked at has had exactly the same adjustments, aside from exposure and white balance, as the first shot. We had it on Portra 400 for our color base, and then we used all soft because we felt like there was already enough contrast in the scene. This is where I think that needs to change. I feel like this is too low contrast. I don't feel like there's any really bright points on the subject's face. We're going to go for all hard, which kind of adds more shadow and brightens the bright parts. And we're going to brighten the image as well, because it's really important to make sure we get this kind of nice, vibrant, dynamic look to the image. And again, I don't think it needs a considerable amount more than that, so we just move on. So back to a similar shot. Now, this is one of those situations where this little tool at the bottom, the film strip, comes in. If I go back and find that shot I previously liked in this situation, and the edits I did to it, I can select that, and then I can go back to the shot that I just found by clicking on it, and hit previous, and again, whatever edits I made to the first shot will be applied here. Now, to my eyes, this is now too dark. Rather than dropping the exposure like we did in the original picture, we're going to brighten it. And we want to brighten it just to the point where there's no detail lost in the window, but we still want to see the kind of liquid in the glass. This is Prosecco in the bride's glass. And again, we go to the next shot, and hit previous to bring up the same adjustments. And again, to my eye, this is still a bit dark, so we raise the exposure. That would probably be okay, but I want it a bit brighter. And then again, we're happy with the edit. We move on to the next shot. Again, previous. And it gets us literally exactly where we need to be in one click. And again, previous. And this is going to be a really extreme adjustment. And this is where having an amazing camera comes in really handy. So remember before we talked about how the different scanner settings change the look of the image. To me, these highlight areas are now too bright. So I want to bring those back, and I want to go through and check those out using highlight soft. In fact, all soft. Bring it back. And then you've got a little bit more detail on the top and bottom. There is a limit, so there's only so far you can bring back detail. And as somebody quite rightly pointed out in the chat, if you hit J, you can see parts of the image that are actually white. Not just bright, but completely white. So there's no detail in here, and you're not going to see anything. And to me, just having a little bit of the image like that isn't really going to be a detriment, especially in this situation when you look at it, you look at it instinctively, you know it's bright, and as a result, having a bit of blown out is not a problem, but you might want to bring some back. You can make manual adjustments to this, but if you look at the right hand side here, the highlights are already quite low. I can bring them back lower, and again, the white's already quite low, and you can bring it back lower. I could raise the shadows. If you look at the kind of the makeup artist's face here, and we can bring that up, but it starts to look a little bit unnatural. So in my experience, I don't really want to go a lot further than where these presets are when using these kind of scanning settings. I'm quite happy with this and the way it is. And again, moving to the next shot. Again, my exposure is not changed because I'm shooting on manual. So if I hit previous, all the adjustments I made in the previous shot will be exactly the same. And again, we're ready to move on. So this is going to be a different lighting situation because rather than having the light behind the subject, she's now being lit from the side. I believe this would look good in black and white, but we're going to try and take a look. Now, when I apply the previous, you can see how much brighter it's making it. We really don't want that. Can you bring it back down? And the white balance is way off. It's really, really warm, and we don't want that either. Again, daylight, which is the least warm setting that we've got through the presets, and then you manually reduce it from there. From experience, I kind of think I want it around about here. If I was going to leave it in color, that would be where I would leave it. However, I'm not likely to. And then, because of the fact there are a lot of different skin tones here, so you've got one skin tone here, there's another light hitting here, another light hitting here, there's a lot going on, and I feel like it distracts from the moment, because the thing you really want to see is this maid of honor looking at the bride. So we now move to a black and white preset because it takes away all the distraction. Now, these are all based on black and white film stocks, but everything else applies. So Delta 3200 is a film that was typically shot in very low light, and it has like a really neutral color palette, and as a result of that, it kind of softens everything. So we had these really bright areas at the front where the bride was, they're now darker, and we had these really dark areas in the background in the shadows, which are much darker. I could go for a different film preset, and if you look at that, that adds a much more dynamic image. It's a lot more punchy. That's not necessarily what I want, so we're going to stick with this for now. And we're going to add the contrast in by hitting all hard, which is how the scanner would adjust to make the darks darker and the brights a little bit brighter, but nowhere near as much as you would if it hit that. Okay, and again, we move on. And again, I quite like the black and white edit we just did, so we're going to go with black and white, and we're going to boost this up, make it a bit brighter, because again, I want to see the whites of her eyes. And again, we're going to move on. So again, this is a point where the previous edits really won't work. So we now need to go back to another similar shot we took earlier, and then come back to the shot we're trying to edit now, and then hit previous. It's too bright, so we reduce the brightness back down. We then end up with a shot that's really similar to the one we had before. Now that might be a shot I'll make black and white because there's a lot going on, but there we go. And again, we go to the next shot, hit previous, and we're in a situation where again, there's a lot of different colors and tones going on. We might need to darken this down a little bit, change the white balance. And again, I still don't like the color, so we're going to make it black and white. As a rule, if the color distracts from the image, I'll go for black and white because I feel like the moment's more important than the color. And again, I think there's a lot of different stuff going on here. So there's blue here and orange here, and it's a bit distracting, where really what we want you to look at is what's in the mirror over here. And again, the last shot was boosted in exposure quite a lot, so we'll drop it down. We want to get it to the point where when you look at the image initially, your eyes drawn straight here. I want you to be looking there. Okay, and again, we're going to go for black and white. I feel like it was better with a more neutral exposure. Move on. And again, black and white, because I feel like it looked really cool here. Okay, that's cool. Again, all hard doesn't work, but I do want a bit more contrast. This is a situation where I may choose to go to another film stock, but because I like things to look consistent, I'm going to stick with the same adjustments we had for the previous image, so you're not going to feel like it's jarring moving from one image to another. And then move on. So at this stage, we are going to take a look at the questions that you guys have asked. If you've got any other questions that you've not already put in the chat, now's a good time, because I'm going to take a second to read through. But yeah, feel free to ask me anything you'd like to know about everything we've done so far. Okay, perfect. So the majority of the questions so far have been about the software program, and there have been some changes to Lightroom recently, such as they've added profiles, which allow you to kind of decide on the base on how the software converts what the camera captures into what you're editing from. And they've added something called like a dehaze slider, which is like if you're shooting into fog or a situation where it's kind of blurry because there's a haze outside, it gets rid of that haze. But yeah, we're going to crack on now. We're going to keep going. And the next shot we're looking to go to is really similar to another lighting situation back here. We're going to copy this. Copy. We're going to click that, and then we're going to go through. I'm going to hit previous to copy the adjustments. And again, we boosted the exposure needle on quite a lot. We don't need all that here, so we can keep it around about there. Again, we want all soft. We need to go to the right presets. So here we go, portrait, all soft. And again, we're back in a situation where we've got something similar here. But yeah. Okay, so just saw a question pop up in the chat. How often do you say you crop or straighten your pictures? Up until now, you haven't done that. So the reason I haven't done that yet, Martin, is because I do that last. I pretty much crop or straighten any image that's not got a straight horizon, and I strongly prefer wider images. So usually I'll apply a crop to make something 16:9 if I can. And if you want to see how I would make the judgment call, it's usually about how much extra space you've got. So I'm going to give you an example of a shot that's begging for a crop. If we go back to the beginning, the very first image, in my opinion, all of the interesting stuff in this photograph is in the center. I hit crop, aspect, 16:9, and then I readjust to make sure that all of the information is in the area that I'm looking at. And if I can help it, I try and get the subject's eyes as close to either here, or this top line as I can. And it just gets rid of a lot of the extra information that's not needed. So that's how we do it with a wide crop. Now, for any images that I shoot that are portraits, that are vertical, I usually crop it because I feel like that the 2:3 ratio that you get from a camera most of the time doesn't look particularly flattering in that aspect. So in those situations, I'll crop it to be a 4:5 or a 3:4 aspect instead. Basically because I feel like it makes it a lot easier not to waste any space in the frame, and it makes it clearer what your subject is. So when we get to a portrait image, I'll show you how that works. But usually landscape images, if I can help it, I don't want any wasted space, so I'll crop it down to make sure that we've got the information in the right spots. I would spend longer than this doing it, because with a shot like this, you can actually make an argument that you could use the hand here to kind of get in, to kind of like draw the eye a little bit and frame her. So I might frame it a bit higher or lower, and I will take time over that, but I do it last, mainly because if I do it first, it takes up too much time. I want to make sure that I've got the image to a point where I can assess it before I decide whether or not it deserves a crop. There are exceptions to that, but to be honest, there aren't many exceptions to that. And again, this image is the very following image. I'd probably go through and crop this as well, because again, there's a lot of wasted information, and I want to draw attention to the hands in the foreground of the image, the hands here, the glass, and putting them all in this section with a lot of kind of like negative space over here is good. Pop a color on the other side, and I feel like it would just support a better composition. And it means that that wasted space at the top is gone, and the wasted space at the bottom is gone. So that's how I would normally crop. Yeah. No, and again, don't feel bad about asking questions. That's exactly why I'm here. Otherwise, I'll just keep going and I'll keep doing what I'm doing. But you'll probably get in the idea that once I'm into a rhythm, I'll just keep going, because the idea is to be fast, so you can get the images out to your bride and groom quicker. It's not about agonizing over small choices. We've gotten up to this image here, and again, previous gets us pretty close. I think it's a bit warm, so again, going to use my judgment and take it down to 5500, because that makes the blue in the background a bit more neutral, and the bridesmaid skin tone looks much nicer. And again, so in this situation, we're going back to the same lighting condition as this. Again, go through and previous, and it syncs it across. It's still not bright enough. Go. Again, I really like this picture. I just like how, I like her expression. I like everything about it. The makeup artist is laughing. I really enjoy that shot. Same with that, really cute. And again, because we've moved into the situation, one at 5500, which is equivalent to daylight. Okay, keep going. This is actually quite a bit slower than I'd normally edit as well, because I'm trying to explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it. Again, I'm checking the exposure there and bringing that down. This again is an image I would absolutely 100% crop, because there is a ton of wasted information in this shot. Nobody cares about the top of these wardrobes. Nobody cares about the bottom bit of this bed. What we care about are the bridesmaids that are in the main part of the shot, and we want to move them so that they feature more prominently in the image than everything else that's going on. And again, normally cropping is something that I do take a little while with, because I feel like it's important. I feel that's pretty much where I'd probably leave it. So give me a second. Now, this is again is a huge example of a situation where a camera like this is fantastic. What I wanted from this shot was a strong silhouette with light hitting her from the front and nothing from the back. When I photographed it, I knew that I wanted it in black and white, and I wanted it to be highly contrasty. I'm going to go to my film choices, and I'm going to pick a black and white film, and I'm going to go for the maximum contrast in the scan before I do anything else. So I'm then going to raise the exposure until you can just see the edges kind of being picked out on her. And again, we're going to crop this down to here. Now the issue is that because there's a washing machine at the bottom of the steps, this is probably not going to be an image that ends up on my website, but I really like the movement in it, I like the feeling in it, and it's something that I'll do again at another wedding when I've got similar situations. So again, you're looking at a situation to try and practice to work out exactly what you want to get out of the scene. So sometimes you get those shots, and it's still good enough to include in the gallery, because the couple might want to see this. It might be nice to see somebody kind of moving in and out of the room. And again, it's good for me because it's practice on a shot that I'm going to do again somewhere else, for definite. I love this. And again, black and white first, because I want to see how it looks with just nothing distracting. And again, that expression is genius. I love that. And again, the crop, I'd bring the crop down because I want to make sure that the focus is on her. And there is way too much contrast in here because we tried to make it punchy in the last shot. I'm going to hit all soft, which brings the contrast down. I'm going to bring the exposure way down, about there. So what I'm looking for is to try and make sure we're not losing any detail. So again, if you hit J on the keyboard, it'll show you blue for any areas that are completely black and there is no detail, and red for any areas that are completely white and there's no detail. I don't mind if it's black because it's black and white. That's what we're looking for. And there are no blown highlights, which is what I want to see, because for some reason they just look a lot worse to my eyes. Again, we'll move on. I love this moment too. So again, back to that situation we had previously, where we know the light's right. The exposure is likely to be different because I've gone down and tried to do something different and then come back to this. We hit previous, and pretty much there. I could probably get away with pushing it a bit further. And let's see how much contrast I can take out of it, because I feel like it's still probably a bit punchy. Yeah, that's pretty much where I'll probably leave it. So this one, again, it's a bit darker because she was doing something here. Jemima was doing something here while Harley, the bride, was getting her makeup done, but I wanted to kind of quickly switch. So I didn't change my exposure straight away, but again, camera helps a lot with that. I can boost the exposure up quite a bit and still get these lovely kind of details. It does introduce like tiny amounts of grain in the background, but frankly, if you're looking at the grain in the background, I don't know what you're doing. Like the subject's over here. It's not distracting to me in the slightest, and I'd be completely happy with this. I do also play a bit of noise reduction, so you probably wouldn't see that when I've finished exporting the gallery. So again, previous, and that takes us to a point where we're too bright because I've adjusted to get my exposure to be better. Because if you can get it right in the camera, you absolutely should. We're looking at somewhere around about there. And again, I'll probably take a little bit more time setting exposure than we are here, but there you go. So it took Jemima 6 or 7 attempts trying to get this bottle open and realizing she couldn't do it. So the reason there's quite a few pictures of this is because anybody that was there on the day will realize that it was taking her forever to open this bottle. And again, I feel like the white balance is probably a little bit warm in these. So I'm just going to go back through and change them back to daylight, which brings the kind of into kind of a cooler tone, which feels a bit more natural for the moment. And I find myself doing this very often. So with color, it's really easy to get out of whack because you judge color in a relative sense. If you've edited a load of images one, and then all of a sudden you think, well, hang on a second, that's too much. It's worth going back to make sure that your previous images are actually right. Again, this is where we got up to. This is the kind of white balance we've got. Again, previous, because my exposure hasn't changed, they should be looking there or thereabouts. So the difference in brightness there will be if the sun came out from behind the clouds outside, or if something in the room moved, say somebody's walking in front of the mirror. This is considerably brighter, so when I click previous, this is going to be too bright. I'm going to bring that down. And again, just try and find a sweet spot. And again, we want the highlights as soft as possible, and they already are, which is good. So again, I've adjusted my exposure for the window, and then I've come back here and I've not corrected enough. So I need to brighten this up. I guess you kind of get the idea. It's a case of making broad changes to one image and then trying to make the same changes to the images that are in the same situation. It means that you're going to make sure you get consistent results, and in the end you're going to end up with pictures that look perfect next to each other. And again, it's better to make sure that the whole body of your portfolio looks consistent, in my opinion, rather than having one hero image that looks amazing and then 100 other images that look average. I'd much rather that we went for a great quality across the board as opposed to an amazing quality in just one picture, because in the end your wedding's about more than just one picture. So again, this is a prime example of a situation where I would crop, not because I feel the composition needs it, but I feel like if it was me, I probably wouldn't want to see that in the shot in my own image. So what I'll do here is again show you how I would crop that. This might take a little bit. I'll try and crop it under the mouth because the mouth of thing was distracting, and again it brings the attention back to the glass, which has made of honor written on it. Okay. Now the thing with this is that now that I've done that and I've applied the crop, it then applies it to the following image, and it's a case of then me just repositioning it as I go through. And again, one of the reasons I crop last is because I can just go through and get in a roll and change it all through. So in this situation, I again expose for the highlights, mainly because you can boost the shadows quite a long way. I'm going to go previous to get to the same base as the last image, and then we're going to bring the exposure up until I feel it's more reasonable. So around about there. And again, the lights change, so I change the white balance again to make sure it's more accurate to how it looks in the room on the day. And again, we crack on and keep going. That's a huge adjustment. Now, the reason we see such a big difference here is this is actually the A7 II, so it's a different camera. And as a result, the files look different. They're not drastically different, they're pretty close, but I tend to find that the A7 III gives you an image that's a little bit darker straight at the camera, whereas the A7 II is a bit more accurate to life. So if you get it right in the camera, the way that your meter's telling you the way that it looks on the A7 II, it will look like that when you get it into the editing software. Whereas with the A7 III, it looks quite a bit darker. Case of going through like that. Now, to try and save a bit of time and get onto some of the sections of the wedding day, I'm just going to go to some highlight images from this section. So you go to attributes. I've already 5-starred a few images that I kind of felt were important for this part of the day. And this is the last one that we had in this section that we've already edited. And again, you'll see some similarities between them because there's a kind of a moment that I was looking to get. I feel like this is a beautiful image of this like younger bridesmaid. We're going to go through, and again, black and white, all soft because we want lower contrast, and then we want to bring that down. So you've got this lovely kind of like soft light on her skin, and then all this like really cool shadow at the back of the shot. Now, for this, I would definitely leave it like this because I feel like the hands down here add something to the shot, and I feel like her eyes add something, and there's not an easy way to crop this without it looking like it's too squashed, or you're losing some of the kind of balance in the image. This shot is pretty much perfect already, so rather than applying previous, we've already got the 400 on there. I feel like we're losing some detail. I'm going to hit all soft to bring some of that back, and I'm going to slightly darken the image just to kind of improve the skin tone slightly. And it doesn't really need all that much, like maybe there, because I quite like it. I quite like it being bright. I quite like it looking like airy and light, but it's just working out how bright and light you want it. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of trial and error. Again, it's a nice moment. This is the bride's mum and the bride, and she's looking over at her bridesmaids on the day. Again, so the skin tones are pretty much where we want them in the image, and I think that's probably a bit bright now. So, remember about that. Love this moment. Like Jemima just looks like she's got like a really great pose there. It's kind of still, and again the makeup artist is doing, so the hairdresser stylist is doing a great job putting the kind of florals in the hair. Again, pretty much where I want it. So I'm going to make it all soft to reduce the contrast, but then I want it to be a bit brighter. So we're going to keep going through here and trying to make sure that we get it to the brightness that we really want. Okay, and I'm probably going to leave it around about there. Again, I feel like it's got that light, airy look, and I don't know about you, it's what I'd want on my wedding day. Now, I tend to stage this at most weddings because I feel like it's so important for bridesmaids and family to see the bride for the first time in their wedding dress and have it be a moment. So we had the bride hang back and had all the bridesmaids come and stand in the lounge to make sure that they weren't seeing her in a dress. The only person that had seen her like this so far was her chief bridesmaid. So this is their genuine reaction to seeing her for the first time, and they all get a hug. And I couldn't really pick just one of these because I feel like they were really good. And if it was me, I would want to see this moment with all of my wife's bridesmaids rather than just one of them. So we go through the lot. And this is the father of the bride. And I think his reaction is pretty priceless. Now, because of how extreme the contrast is here, I'm going to make this black and white because it's easier to kind of make that look natural. So can you see how much lower the contrast is now? And then when we darken this, it looks more normal. And even though this isn't the greatest photograph from an objective point of view, I feel like it tells a story, and it's important to include that. So this is the her father looking at her for the last time before she sets off to get married. Now, the next thing we're going to look at, because I'm going to leave the ceremony for now purely because the lighting in that hall was bad. It had really poor lights, and there's quite a lot of color issues. We can go into that if you want to later on, but for now we're going to move on to the venue. So this covers from the point where they leave the kind of ceremony and then start going to the venue. And this is an example of where I would definitely crop straight away. So I've got a crop, an aspect, and then I crop to 4x5, 8x10. Once I've made that decision once, everything that is in that orientation that is cropped will get cropped to this aspect. Now, in the previous section you saw that we made a global adjustment to everything's color. We're going to do exactly the same here. We're going to go select all, saved preset, and we're going to go back and apply our basic color presets. Ultra 400. And then we're going to go through and apply lens corrections because I don't want to have to do that for every image as we come across them. And then we're going to go through these one at a time. Again, we're just waiting for this preset to finish applying. Back on. So while that's happening, does anybody have any other questions? I know that I'm kind of covering stuff and we're taking quite a while in each area, but I wanted to kind of make sure that I answered anything as it came up. If nobody's got any questions, that's fine, but feel free to ask them if you have them. There's a bit of a lag on the chat, so if you say anything, it'll take a minute to come through. Right. The preset's applied. I'm going to crack on, and we're going to keep editing. So again, I'm pretty much happy with this. I probably want it a bit darker. And as you can probably see, we're back in the library module, and this panel on the right-hand side has changed. This is also a really good way of getting through stuff quickly. So I'm going to use the left and right arrow keys to move between images, and I'm going to use these controls here to brighten or darken an image. And you can see it can get you pretty far. And you can balance things by looking at the skin tone and prioritizing that at pretty much any time. And again, that's this doesn't need anything at all. Slightly darker. Again, doing exactly the same thing, changing the exposure. Each click on this to the right will bring up the exposure by 1/3 of a stop if you've not seen this before. Now this needs a white balance change. So again, we go to the presets the same way as we did before, and we go through to the master mods original, and we go through it. Now in the library module, it does not show you the preview of how it will change your white balance. If you're making any color changes, I would recommend using the develop module because it's just going to show you more of what you've got. And in this situation, daylight is way too cold, cloudy is a bit meh, and open shade adds the right amount of orange to make the skin tones look a bit more natural. So again, we're back in develop now. We know that's right. Hit previous and we're pretty much there. And we keep going through to get exactly the same adjustments done on all the shots. And this one needs a bit more adjustment because he was really far in the back of the car. This is one of the groomsmen driving past as we went to the venue. So I took a quick snap. I was a passenger, so don't kill me. Keep going. Arrival at the venue. This is just a few of the guests. Now, this is where having a second shooter comes in. So at this stage, there were two of us photographing. I was taking the majority of the pictures, and Kate, my wife, peels off and she does the detail shots of the venue and then takes some random pictures of guests that are enjoying themselves or the rest of it while I'm doing the family formal pictures. So we kind of split up at this stage. Now, Kate is not technically a second shooter. We don't kind of charge extra and she doesn't shoot on her own. It is very much just me as a primary and she kind of assists, but she definitely does take pictures and she's getting incredible at that at the moment. She's had a lot of practice recently and is getting much better with every wedding that she shoots. So some of the shots you'll see are hers and some of them are mine. And honestly, the only way to tell sometimes is looking at the camera that she had and remembering what it was like on the day, because she's really good. And again, we're just doing exactly the same process. After I've made one set of changes, it's fairly simple for me to go through and adjust these images so they match. Way too bright. And again, sometimes the reason that some of these shots are brighter is because they were taken on the A7 II and not the A7 III, and that just exposes brighter camera. Okay. Now, one thing you might have seen here is the majority of the stuff that we've done so far has been all pretty well lit. Everybody's been pretty happy. It's been pretty easy to get good results because it's natural light. The shot is mainly there to begin with from the camera. And there's very little for us to do to make the shots look better or worse. Now, this is not always the case. So in a minute, we're going to have a look at some of the shots from the portraits. Okay, so it's probably going to be a candidate for a nice black and white. And once we looked at the portraits, we're going to go right through and have a look at some of the shots from the ceremony. So not from the ceremony, from the reception later on. So first dance and later, because we get into some more challenging lighting situations that are really going to kind of test the camera a bit more. Again, prime example of a situation where I would crop. Because again, there's a lot of wasted information. I'll probably clone out that fire alarm as well using the clone tool. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it just gets rid of it as a distraction. And just got to make sure that this lines up properly so it doesn't look distracting. Again, probably going to crop this one 16:9 because all the information is happening in this space here and nothing above or below that is super important. And I'd want a bit more contrast, so again, all hard, we'll add the contrast back. And then crop 15:9. Click. Again, same situation, just slightly different expression. Now this is brighter, so when I hit previous, I am going to have to darken it again. Probably a little bit more even. And we carry on. Now this I think is going to be a black and white image. Now again, the reason I'm doing that, the reason it's going to be black and white is because the light in the background is quite yellow. The light under this awning is kind of blue purple. So again, it doesn't look good because both types of light are in the same shot. So rather than trying to fight with that, black and white, all soft to bring some of the detail back in the background and in the skin, and then we brighten it to bring attention back. And this absolutely definitely needs to be cropped because again, there's wasted space at the top of the image. And we want to make sure the focus is on this lady at the front. Perfect. Again, crop, because I absolutely hate the standard 2:3 crop. And this looks pretty well there. I'd probably change the white balance because again, I like consistency. But I do that across a range of images rather than just trying to do it for one. Let's try and make sure it stays consistent. And to be honest with that, I think we're going to have a look at some of the later sections of the day because we've got a bit of a feel for how that looks. We're going to move on to portraits, and we're going to do portraits from a wide variety of situations. Now, in here, I can't really apply the same preset to everything because the portraits are taken at 3 different times a day. There's the first section, which is taken in broad daylight, full sun. There's a picture that Kate took, which shows that I actually do work. And then later on in the day, we take some shots that are silhouetted or very close to it at sunset. We're going to do a few of the shots that are early in the day in full sun and a few that are silhouetted, and then we're going to have a look at that evening reception. And again, these don't need much doing to them because they're already well exposed from the camera. So this darkness around the sides here, this is what turning lens corrections on gets rid of. So can you see that it brightened these side areas and it kind of stopped the image from distorting around the edges. And again, as with everything else, I try and keep a consistent color base. I apply Portrait 400, which makes things look a little bit brighter. I might bring them down, but then some of the shadows are too much, so we reduce the contrast with all soft. And again, move on, previous. Okay, I'm not a fan of that. Nicer, brighter, so we keep going. And again, largely it's a game of balancing everything out to make sure that you've got consistent exposure throughout all of your shots. So after we've done this one, we're going to move on. There you go. So again, nice, even exposure, beautiful portrait. And then we're going to go down to some shots that are in much worse lighting conditions. Well, not worse. It's really cool light, but it's just a lot harder to shoot in. So for this shot, what I really wanted was not them in silhouette. If you look at the skin here at the back, you can see how there's just a little bit of light on the edges that kind of adds dimension to the shot. That's what I wanted. So the aim here is to try and make it so that we can see more of the bride and groom without losing that soft tonality on the skin. Again, Portrait 400 as a base. I'm going to leave the lens corrections off on this one because I feel like it will draw attention to the bride and groom. And again, we're going to raise the exposure until we start to see a little bit more detail. Now, I don't mind it being slightly silhouetted here, but the color is off. So we have a look through. Open shade gives us lovely, nice, warm, glowy light, and it keeps that nice pinkish tint in the background. We'll stick with that. And again, previous because we want it similar. In this shot, I will probably brighten it because we don't have those defined edges that we can look at. We'll need a bit more. And again, previous. We're getting this lovely moment and a nice shot of the bride's ring. But again, it has this really soft tone to it. So it's more about the way that it felt to be there at that time of day than anything else. And we go through and edit more with similar adjustments because really nothing has changed from this moment through to this moment, so we don't need to make any changes to the preset. Now here, I've exposed brighter because I'm trying to get more of a traditional portrait where you can see the bride and groom's faces fully, but I still want to make sure that we're retaining the detail in the background to show that pinkish tinge. Again, it's about finding a balance where you can see them and you can also see what's happening behind them. Again, previous. In this shot, I feel like a little bit more would help her skin tone. Again, a little bit more exposure. I think originally in the edit, I'd probably edited this one black and white because I feel like it adds a bit more of a mood. So we're going to do that again here. We're going to go to Delta. Now all soft takes away too much of the drama, so we're going to do highlight soft, which just brings back the detail in the highlights only. And move on and crop this again because I prefer that crop. Now these shots I would typically spend a little bit more time editing. Mainly because there is so much contrast in this scene, we need to do some local adjustments. So let's take a look at that. So again, apply the color base, get our white balance, which is open shade because it's in the same lighting situation as every other shot, and then get the exposure right on the couple. Now there are a few ways of doing this. So that is correct, the skin tone. That's what the skin looked like, it's what it should look like. However, I do not think that is the best way to achieve that. So if we look here, we added 2 stops to the exposure to get their skin to the brightness that we wanted. So if we get rid of that, and we get a brush, we can make changes with a brush that would be similar. Now, I think that 2 stops will be a bit extreme, but let's just show it off to show what it does. You can paint the brightness that you would have applied to the whole image onto only part of it. And all of a sudden, you're left with a situation where the bride and groom are as bright as the background. To me, that looks really unnatural because it's too severe. So there's a way of dealing with this that kind of takes a little bit of both. So you erase some of the adjustments so the areas that should be darker are still darker. And you try and get rid of it anywhere that you don't want the eye drawn to. So you're left with the adjustment only affecting part of the image, not all of it. And then, after you've decided your selection's good and you're happy with what you've got, you can tweak it. If you close this and you click on this node again, you can make adjustments. And there are other ways to adjust it other than just exposure. So all these sliders underneath it will make changes, like the highlights. You can see it brings out some of the whites in the skin tone. Shadows gets rid of some of the shadows, and that looks really unnatural, so it's going to stay where it is. Whites are just the brightest part only, and blacks basically takes out the darkest black. So for this situation, the slider we're actually interested in is highlights, because if you look at it, it brings out some of the detail in the skin tones. And again, it's a balancing act between exposure and highlights to get the result you're looking at. That is nowhere near what I would deliver. These images are the kinds of images that you would spend 15, 20 minutes editing just on the one. Usually, again, I'll do these last because I feel like doing them first just takes too much momentum out of the edit. So again, we're going to leave that for now, but that's how I approach editing those shots. Back to similar lighting situations what we had before. Not against the sky. Go through, and again, it's about preserving those kind of like finer details in the skin. The kind of soft, like evening look. And some of the information in the sky. That's kind of like how we would approach the portraits later in the day. And then we're going to have a look at the dance floor. So this is probably the most challenging part of the day to shoot. And in terms of like seeing how these images actually look, I can put a link in the description for the client's gallery, so you can take a look and see exactly how all this stuff looked when I actually did finish editing it in the first instance. And again, for the sake of brevity, we're going to have a look at just some highlighted images, so some that we've kind of decided on as favorites. This is I believe he was the best man. Yes, he was the best man, and one of the bridesmaids. And we're going to have a look at this shot. Now, the light in here is pretty dark. This was at ISO 4000. They're right in a light source. It was at 1.4, 1/2 of a second. It's pretty dark. So rather than have this even exposure, we might want to drop that later on. But again, we're going to do exactly what we've been doing up to current. Start with a color base. Start with a preset that you like the look of. So again, all hard for more contrast, and then get the light color right. And as you look at it, none of these presets really work. So there's one other way you can deal with this, aside from just using the slider manually. You can use the eyedropper tool, which will basically match white to whatever you put underneath it. So if I put it on this collar on a white shirt, it's going to try and make the white of that white shirt the dominant white in the image, and you end up with this. To my eye, this is a little bit cold, so that's a good starting point, but we can make it a little bit warmer. Go to 3000, which again is close to where we started, but a little bit more on the green side in terms of the shadows, and a little bit kind of cooler. It takes some of the pinkishness out of the skin and a few other bits and pieces. This shot is most definitely made for black and white. You might have seen this on my Instagram already, but I really like this shot. I feel it's kind of a good way of summing up how the mood of the evening was. There's a lot going on. Everybody's dancing, everything's in motion. There's blur because they're moving quickly, and it feels emotional. It feels close. But all I did there was literally just a case of Delta 3200 to apply the black and white look, all soft to reduce the contrast, and then a little bit of extra exposure to make it a little bit brighter because it was quite dark where we were. I love this moment. I think it's really cool. All the groomsmen had kind of had somebody on their shoulders, and I was waiting for a moment where it was kind of the groom's turn, if you like, and he got up and started doing this cool hand gesture. And again, usually with shots like this, the white balance is set with a range of images, so we'll go through and decide how the scene should look based on, say, 150 images rather than just one, so you get a more consistent white balance. But it's pretty close. It feels pretty similar to how it was in the room. So we move on. The bride and groom were dancing at random, and again, applying the same preset, you can see how useful that is, how good it is just to be able to kind of adjust things so that they look very consistent shot to shot. And again, I'm going to apply lens corrections on, see how it looks. I feel like it just kind of takes away some of the kind of vibe of it, so I'm going to turn it off again. And I'm going to achieve a brighter image by increasing the overall exposure. And I feel like it's a little bit cold looking, so we're going to add a bit more warmth using the white balance slider. And it can be really small adjustments. Again, this is probably a candidate for black and white, mainly because the color is a bit unattractive. But you could probably deliver it like that, and it looks pretty great. So as an alternative edit, you can definitely make very, very high ISO, low light situations look good in color. It just takes a lot more work to get every image to this stage. In this case, it did look good. It doesn't always. And again, we're looking at Delta 3200, which is my preferred film stock for this. And I actually prefer the contrast where it is a standard, so we would just leave it. It is a bit bright if we're going to make it black and white, so I would reduce the exposure slightly because it adds a bit more definition to skin while it still stays smooth. Again, similar. I like the place, I like the moment. I feel like it'd be better in black and white. So again, we're applying the adjustments from the previous shot, this time all soft for less contrast, and then we're boosting the exposure. And this again would be a shot I'd probably spend a little bit longer on. Do you like it as it stands though? Cool. This I think is going to work better in color. Again, it's trying to find correct white balance, and for every other image we've been around about 3000 Kelvin. Now it's way too magenta, so we would adjust the tint. Okay. And then I feel like we need more brightness. You get this nice moment of the bride dancing with the chief bridesmaids, nice and warm. Crop, super important on this shot, because there's something not very attractive, which is all the empty chairs and desks behind them and this wasted information above. You would bring in the crop closer and you would keep the space between them on a third. You end up with a much tighter image where the focus is definitely on them and not on the background. It's a really nice moment between one of the bridesmaids and the bride again. Actually also the groom's sister, so it was a really kind of important moment for us to catch because it kind of meant a lot for the two of them. Now, I feel like the colour here is a little bit iffy because it's kind of a different colour, a different tint here to here. So again, if I was trying to be thorough, I would again make them black and white, level out some of the contrast by making it all soft to give us a bit more of like a nice neutral grainy black and white look instead. Again, you can get that nice black and white look. All I've done is hit previous there and it's brought it all in. For this one I'm going to go colour again, and this is the final image we're going to edit today. Again, we're going to go colour, apply the colour base, Portrait 400. I believe we want to stick with it as it stands at base. And again, it's just going to be a case of adjusting the white balance. So it's around about 3000 Kelvin, and that's too pink. So we bring the pink down a little bit to compensate, and you end up with too much green. Kind of a case of back and forth. And if you want to cheat, you can hit the eyedropper, drop it on a white point, and it will give you a correct white. But again, I feel like that's a little bit too white, too blue. Add some more warmth back in. And that's how we edit at night. So we've kind of rushed through this. Typically a wedding like this will take me between 8 and 16 hours of editing time to complete. So obviously we've been running at this stage for around about an hour of actual edit time. This is considerably quicker, and we've done a lot less on each image than I would, but it gives you an idea as to how I would go through and select the adjustments that I make and how I keep something consistent. So if we look at these again, we'll see consistency in the kind of atmosphere and the vibe between the shots wherever possible. And that doesn't happen by accident. If you've noticed, I've only used one color preset, Ultra 400, one black and white preset, Ilford Delta 3200, because I want the black and white to look one way, and I want the color to look one way, and I want every image in this album to look like it belongs together. So everything else is about adjusting white balance, exposure, and very little else. Cropping. There are a couple of situations where you would want a hero image that you would spend longer on. On average at a wedding, I have one of those. And that's largely because I believe weddings are about moments and not about a staged photograph. I never use flash at a wedding, like never, because I feel like it interferes with moments and it takes away some of the focus from the people that are in the photographs and brings attention to you as a photographer. So you're going to see something very consistent. The adjustments are for the light that is available, the colors that are there, everything needs to look real. So with all that said, that's the edit. I'm going to post a link in the description to the couples gallery. It's currently on my website. If you want to go there now, feel free. It's www.bytomw.com, bytomw.com, and then click online galleries, and there'll be a list of all the recent galleries that we've delivered over the last month or two. If you click on Harley and Grant, you can enter the gallery. Feel free to have a look at any of the images we've shot, anything we've photographed, and take a look at how they look as a final result. What I really want you to see is how consistent it is. how every single image looks similar, if not the same. I want it to look as uniform as possible. I want them all to look vibrant and colourful and correct, but that's exactly what we want. We want something that feels like it belongs together, not a random assortment of epic pictures. This is your wedding day. It's a story. It's not just one or two photographs. From this wedding, we delivered 1,477 images, and they were all edited in exactly the same way, the way you've seen here. And when I do these live streams again, it's likely to be that you're going to be seeing more of the same, because I honestly and truly believe this is the correct way to edit a wedding. If what you're looking for is a consistent storytelling style and not the kind of hero approach that you see some wedding photographers take, there is nothing wrong with that approach. If what you really want is one epic picture, there's nothing wrong with that. If what you want is a story of your day that talks about the people that you spent your time with, the people you love, you and your husband, how you've been together, like how you interact with each other, that's what I'm about. That's what you're going to see in these galleries, and we edit with that in mind, we photograph with that in mind, and we speak to people with that in mind. With all that said, thank you very much for watching. If you've got this far in, please subscribe, hit the like button, or dislike if you hated it, but please don't dislike it. That would crush me a little bit, I'm not going to lie. And yeah, if you've got any kind of questions, feel free to drop me a message. I am most active on Instagram, so it's Instagram at BYTOMW. And yeah, feel free to reach out, and we'll see you guys soon. Thanks again for watching.